Fat Girl was sold to Circus as freak show. Mountain Man burned down the tent and said, "You're free. Take her." Silas Grimm sneered, his voice cold as iron. "She's worth nothing here, but in your circus she'll make you a fortune." The summer heat of 1912 pressed heavy over Millbrook's dusty square. Townsfolk had gathered outside Barnum's traveling circus wagon, curious and eager for spectacle. But what they saw was no performance. It was a sale of flesh and blood. Prue Whitmore, 32 years old, stood trembling at the center of it all. Her frame, swollen with over 300 pounds of weight, had always made her the target of whispers, laughter, and cruel names. Now her own stepfather was bartering her body like livestock. Mortimer Black, the ringmaster, licked his lips as his black-gloved hand reached for a coin pouch. "Perfect," he said with a wicked grin. "The world's fattest woman. Crowds will pay to gape at her misery." Gasps rippled through the onlookers, some snickering, others turning away in shame. Prue's tears burned hot down her cheeks. "Please," she begged, her voice breaking. "I'll work, I'll clean, I'll do anything. Just don't sell me." But Silas's reply was colder than stone. "You are no daughter of mine. You're nothing but a burden. At least now you'll earn your keep." Laughter erupted as Mortimer snapped his fingers, and 2 circus men stepped forward with chains. The crowd jeered, coins clinking as bets were placed on how long she would last in the freak show cage. Prue closed her eyes, praying for the ground to swallow her whole. Then, from the back of the gathering, a sound tore through the night, a deep, thunderous roar that silenced every mocking tongue. "Enough! She is free!" The crowd froze, their laughter dying like a candle smothered in ash. Heads turned toward the source of the voice. From the shadow of the fairground's outer ring, a figure rose. He was taller than any man they had ever seen. Massive shoulders, a barrel chest, hair the color of wildfire spilling down his back. His eyes blazed a furious blue, and when he stepped forward, the earth itself seemed to shudder. Colossus Cole, Flameheart, the giant of Fire Ridge Mountain. Whispers rippled through the townsfolk. "It's him, the hermit, the fire giant." Some took a step back, as though his presence alone carried danger. But to Prudence, still shackled in humiliation, his shadow felt like a shield. Mortimer Black, though rattled, forced a sneer across his sharp face. "And who might you be, old man? This is my show, my property. Don't mistake yourself for a hero." Cole's voice was low, steady, but it carried across the square like rolling thunder. "She is no man's property, not yours, not his." His eyes cut to Silas, who shrank against the wagon's side, suddenly less bold. "She is a woman, and you will not cage her." Prue's heart pounded. For years she had known nothing but scorn. From neighbors who whispered behind her back, from children who hurled insults in the street, and worst of all, from her own family who had treated her size as both curse and shame. She had learned to shrink into herself, to apologize for simply existing. And now this stranger, this mountain giant, was speaking words she had never heard in her defense. Mortimer snapped his fingers, summoning 2 of his strongest men. They moved toward Cole, wielding iron rods. The ringmaster's grin returned. "We'll put on a different kind of show tonight. The crowd loves a good fight." Cole did not flinch. His massive frame loomed over the thugs as he advanced. "Try," he rumbled. "You'll find iron bends easier than my patience." The townsfolk watched, breathless. Some were thrilled at the chance for violence, Others prayed silently that blood would not be spilled. But Prue, bound and trembling, found herself staring at the giant's back. Something in her chest stirred, not hope, not yet, but the faintest glimmer of possibility. With a single motion, Cole struck. One swing of his arm sent the iron rod clattering across the dirt. The other thug stumbled backward, clutching his wrist where Cole had gripped him like a toy. Gasps filled the night air. Mortimer's grin faltered. He looked at the crowd, searching for support, but found only silence. The spectacle had shifted. No longer was Prudence the attraction. The mountain man was. Cole turned then, kneeling beside Prue. His hands, though large enough to snap chains like twigs, touched her wrists with gentleness. "You don't belong in cages," he murmured. Her throat tightened. Why would you help me?" she whispered. His gaze met hers, steady and unflinching. "Because once I was the one behind the bars." The words lodged in her heart like a spark on dry tinder. Before Mortimer could command another attack, Cole hoisted Prue into his arms as if she weighed no more than a child. He faced the ringmaster, his voice ringing like judgment. "She leaves with me, and if you or any man dares follow, then you'll answer to the mountain." The crowd parted in silence, and for the first time in her life, Prudence was carried away not as a burden, but as someone worth saving. The road out of Millbrook stretched into the night, dust rising behind the heavy boots of Colossus Flameheart. In his arms, Prudence lay cradled against his chest, her heart pounding so hard she feared he might hear it. The jeers of the crowd had faded, replaced by the distant cries of circus men too frightened to give chase. The further they moved from the fairground, the quieter the world became. Only the rasp of crickets and the soft shuffle of Cole's stride filled the silence. For Prue, who had spent weeks locked in a cage of iron bars, the open air felt both terrifying and intoxicating. Finally, Cole stopped by the riverbank. The moon painted the water silver, and tall pines leaned overhead like guardians. He set her down gently upon a smooth rock. "You're safe now," he said. Safe. The word tasted foreign on her tongue. She pulled her shawl tighter around herself, avoiding his gaze. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why would you risk yourself for me?" Cole knelt, his giant frame casting a shadow across the river. He reached into his pack, pulling out a loaf of dark bread. He broke it in half and handed it to her. "Eat," he said simply. Her stomach ached with hunger, but her pride hesitated. All her life she had been mocked for eating, for every bite, every crumb, every swallow. Now she sat before a stranger, too ashamed to accept. Cole's eyes softened. "I've seen men starve behind gilded cages while others feast and mock. You deserve bread as much as any soul alive." Her throat tightened. She reached out, trembling, and accepted. The bread was coarse, yet warm against her lips. She hadn't realized how deeply hunger gnawed at her until that first bite. Cole sat across from her, saying nothing more, only watching the river flow. His silence was not the cruel silence of judgment, but the quiet of a man who had long lived with his own shadows. As the night deepened, Cole gathered pine branches and struck a fire to life. The flames flickered against his scarred hands, revealing the story of years lived in solitude. He laid his coat upon the ground. "Rest," he told her. I don't want to be a burden," she said, tears threatening. He looked at her then, truly looked. "You are not a burden. You are a person. Remember that." She lay back, staring at the stars through wet lashes. For the first time in years, no one laughed at her. No one threw scraps or called her names. Instead, a stranger guarded her sleep like a sentinel. The following day, they climbed higher into the mountains. The air grew cooler, sharp with the scent of pine and melting snow. The trail was rough, but Cole moved with steady strength. When her legs trembled, he offered his hand. When the sun burned her face, he draped his cloak across her shoulders. At midday, they paused by a stream. He filled a tin cup and handed it to her. She caught his reflection in the water, eyes so fierce when he fought, now softened with quiet care. "Do you live alone up there?" she asked cautiously. "Yes." His answer was brief, but not unkind. "And why? A man like you could rule this valley." His lips twitched, almost a smile. "I've no desire to rule, only to be left in peace." Prue studied him, curiosity pushing past her fear. "Then why break your peace for me?" He leaned on his knee, staring into the current. "Because I know what it is to be chained for another man's profit. Because no soul deserves that, not even if the world calls them strange, or too much, or too little." His gaze flicked to her, steady and unyielding. "Especially not you." The words pierced her heart. For so long she had believed the lies, that she was worthless, ugly, unlovable. Yet this man spoke as if she mattered. By dusk, the trail steepened. Mist rose from the fir trees, wrapping them in ghostly gray. But when they crested a ridge, Prue gasped. Before her spread the valley of Fire Ridge Mountain, wild, untouched, painted gold by the sinking sun. Cole glanced at her expression, a rare warmth touching his rugged face. "Almost home." She whispered the words to herself, clinging to them like a prayer. Home. Cole's cabin stood on a rise of stone above the valley, built from timber so thick it looked as if even the fiercest storm could not bring it down. Smoke drifted from a stone chimney, and the scent of wood fire carried warmth through the crisp mountain air. For Prudence, whose last home had been a circus cage, the sight of the cabin was almost unbearable. Too good, too safe, too far from the jeers she had known all her life. When Cole opened the heavy door, the glow of firelight spilled across the threshold. Inside, the room was rough but steady. Log walls, a broad hearth where flames crackled, shelves stacked with jars of dried beans and herbs, a wooden table scarred from years of use. On one side stood a bed of pine wood, piled with thick blankets, while in the corner rested a smaller cot. Cole's voice was low, almost hesitant. "You'll take the bed. I'll use the cot." Prue's eyes widened. "But this is your home." "It's a home for both now." He said it simply, as if it were fact. Then he set down his pack, drew off his coat, and moved toward the hearth to stir the flames. The next days fell into a rhythm she had never known. In the mornings, Cole chopped wood while she swept the cabin with a worn broom. At midday, they shared whatever simple meal he prepared, venison stew one day, bread and beans the next. At first, she tried to refuse, ashamed of her appetite, but he would only push the bowl closer and say, "Eat, no shame here." One afternoon, she found him repairing the roof, his massive hands guiding timber beams as easily as if they were straws. She gathered the courage to climb the ladder, holding shingles. "Teach me," she said softly. He glanced at her, surprise flickering in his eyes, but then he nodded. Step by step, he showed her how to set each shingle, how to nail it into place. Her hands shook, but his patience never wavered. "Good," he murmured when she finished the row. "See? Stronger than you thought." She felt her chest tighten. No one had ever said those words to her before. In the evenings after supper, Cole would sit by the fire, carving wood into small figures, birds, bears, once even a little fox. Prue would sew or mend clothing beside him. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they didn't. But the silence was never heavy. It was the kind of silence that wrapped them in peace. One night, as the wind howled outside, she shivered. Cole noticed at once. Without a word, he pulled a blanket from his cot and draped it over her shoulders. She caught his hand, lingering for a heartbeat too long, and when their eyes met, she saw something in his gaze she had never dared imagine. Tenderness. Her confidence grew in small steps. She cooked a meal one evening, simple broth with wild onions, and though she worried it was too plain, Cole ate every spoonful and said, "Better than I could make." Her cheeks warmed in the firelight. Another day, he handed her an axe. She stared at it in disbelief. "You want me to chop wood?" "Why not?" His tone was gentle but firm. The mountain respects those who learn its work. Her first swing was clumsy, but he guided her stance, his large hands steadying hers. When the log finally split, she laughed aloud, the sound ringing through the trees. Cole smiled, an expression rare and almost boyish on his weathered face. Slowly, Prue began to see herself not as the world had painted her, a freak, a burden, but as someone capable, useful, even strong. And Cole, in his quiet way, encouraged each discovery. One evening by the fire, she found herself whispering, "I still feel like I'm just a spectacle, like if I went down into town they'd only laugh again." Cole's hand closed around hers, firm and grounding. "They might. People are blind, but their blindness does not make you less. You are not a spectacle. You are a miracle. Surviving what you did, living through it, that is strength most cannot fathom." Tears stung her eyes, but they were not tears of shame. For once, they were tears of being seen. The days melted into weeks. The cabin, once just a shelter, became a sanctuary. Every creak of the floorboards, every crackle of the fire, every word spoken in Cole's steady voice wove itself into something she had never thought she'd find. Belonging. And though she could not yet name it, something deeper was beginning to bloom. Something as steady as the mountain and as fierce as the fire. The mountain had given them peace, but peace is fragile, too fragile to last forever. It began one gray morning when Prue found Cole staring into the flames long after dawn had broken. His axe leaned unused by the door, and his food sat untouched on the table. His jaw was tight, his eyes distant, as if some shadow from the past had crept into the cabin. "You haven't spoken all morning," she said gently. "What troubles you?" He exhaled, heavy, as though dragging the weight of decades. "I was not always a hermit," he murmured. "Once I was part of the world below, and the world, it tried to own me." She tilted her head, urging him on. "I was 8 years old when they took me from my family," he said. "Barnum's men found me, already taller than grown men, already stronger. They caged me, paraded me as the giant boy. I spent 10 years being stared at, mocked, and used for profit." His hands curled into fists, knuckles white. "I swore when I broke free that no cage would ever hold me again. That's why I live here apart. The world only takes." Prue's heart clenched. His pain mirrored hers, yet magnified. She reached for his arm. "You're not alone anymore?" she whispered. He glanced at her, a flicker of relief in his eyes, but also fear. "And that is what terrifies me. If they know you're here, if Mortimer still hunts you, he shook his head, they'll come. And come they did. 3 days later, while Prue hung washed linens on the line, voices carried from the tree line. Harsh, grating voices. She froze, heart hammering, as a group of men emerged, 5 in all, rifles slung across their shoulders. At their center strode Mortimer Black, his fine coat singed at the hem, his hat tipped low to hide the fury in his eyes. "There she is," he barked, "my golden prize. You think you can steal from me, Flameheart? She belongs to the circus. I paid good coin for her." Prue stumbled back, fear flooding her. Memories of the cage, of rotten food and jeering crowds clawed at her chest. Cole burst from the cabin, axe in hand, his presence filling the clearing like a storm cloud. "She belongs to no one," he thundered. Mortimer sneered. "Do you think you can hide forever on this mountain? The law's on my side. She was sold. Her stepfather signed the papers. That makes her mine." Prue's stomach turned. Papers? Could a signature truly erase her freedom? Cole's voice was calm, but steel edged every word. "Slavery is not law. It is theft of the soul. And I'll see your lies burned like your cursed tent." Mortimer gestured, and his men raised their rifles. "Then we'll take her by force." Prue's breath came ragged. She wanted to hide, to shrink. But another voice rose inside her, a voice Cole had planted in her with every kind word and gentle act. She stepped forward, trembling yet resolute. "I am not your property," she said, her voice cracking but loud enough to echo. "I am not a freak. I am not a prize. I am a woman, and I choose where I belong." She moved to stand beside Cole, her hand brushing his arm. "And I belong here." Mortimer's face twisted in rage. "Ungrateful cow," he spat. "You'll regret those words." Cole raised his axe, his stance unyielding. "No, it is you who will regret stepping onto my mountain." The men faltered, fear flickering in their eyes. They had heard the stories of the fire giant, but now those stories breathed before them, towering, defiant, unbreakable. Still, desperation gleamed in Mortimer's gaze. He would not leave without a fight. That night, as they barred the cabin door and prepared for whatever storm would come, Prue sat by the fire, her hands shaking. Cole knelt beside her, his massive hand covering hers. "You were brave," he said quietly. "I was terrified," she admitted, "and yet you stood." His eyes held hers, steady, proud. "That is courage." She swallowed hard, the truth rising in her chest. "If they come again, if they take me, promise you won't let me go back." Cole's grip tightened. "Over my dead body." Outside, the mountain wind howled, carrying with it the promise of conflict. The storm was coming, and neither of them could hide. The storm broke at dusk 2 nights later. Rain hammered the pines, and thunder rolled down the slopes like drums of war. Prue and Cole had spent the day bracing the cabin, barring the windows, stacking wood for the fire, sharpening tools that could double as weapons. Yet, when the first crack of gunfire split the air, her breath caught in her throat. "They've come," Cole said, voice steady as stone. Mortimer Black's men swarmed up the hill, lanterns swaying, rifles flashing in the rain. Their shouts pierced the storm. "Hand her over! The freak belongs to us!" Prue clutched Cole's arm, but he was already moving, his massive frame blocking the door. "Stay behind me," he ordered. The first man kicked the door in, and Cole's axe swung, splintering the frame and sending the intruder sprawling into the mud. Another fired through the window, glass shattering, but Prue, heart pounding, grabbed the iron kettle from the fire and hurled its boiling contents. The attacker screamed, stumbling back into the storm. She froze, shocked at her own boldness. Cole's eyes met hers across the flickering firelight. "Good," he growled. "Fight with me." Mortimer himself strode into view, coat plastered to his frame by the rain, pistol gleaming in his hand. "Stand aside, Flameheart. She's mine, by law and contract." Cole's laugh was low, terrible, like boulders grinding together. "Law does not live here, only truth, and the truth is, she is free." Mortimer raised his pistol, but before he could fire, Prue stepped forward, voice ringing. "I am not your spectacle. I will never be your prisoner again." Her defiance rang louder than the storm. That instant of hesitation was all Cole needed. With a roar, he drove forward, his axe cleaving Mortimer's pistol from his grip. Sparks flashed, steel clattered, and Mortimer fell to his knees in the mud. The gang scattered, fear finally overtaking greed. The stories of the fire giant had come alive before their eyes, and none wished to test them further. Within moments, only Mortimer remained, kneeling, his fine coat soaked, his arrogance drowned. Cole loomed over him. "You'll confess what you've done. Every theft, every cruelty, every lie, or the mountain will take you." Mortimer, shaking, spat curses, but the fight had left him. Bound and dragged to town the next morning, he was forced before the sheriff to admit his crimes. For Prue, the storm had ended. She was no longer the woman in chains, no longer the freak behind iron bars. She had stood beside the mountain man and found her voice in the fire of battle, and as the dawn broke over Fire Ridge, Cole turned to her, his expression fierce yet tender. "You are free now," he said softly. Prue reached for his hand, her tears lost in the rain. Free and home. The storm had passed, leaving the mountain washed clean. Mist curled between the pines, and the air smelled of wet earth and pine needles. Inside the cabin, the fire burned steady, its light chasing away the shadows that had haunted Prudence for so long. She sat at the wooden table, watching Cole move about the hearth. His great hands, once raised in fury against her captors, now broke bread and poured broth into bowls with the gentleness of a man who knew what it was to hunger and to hurt. When he set a bowl before her, she touched his hand lightly. "You kept your promise," she whispered. Cole met her eyes, his voice quiet but certain. "And I always will." They ate in silence, but it was a silence filled with warmth, not fear. Outside, the mountain wind sighed, as if the valley itself had drawn a breath of relief. Later, they sat by the fire. Cole leaned back in his chair, the flames casting a soft glow over his scarred face. Prue, wrapped in a quilt, gazed at the crackling logs. "You're safe here," Cole said at last. His words were simple, but to her they were more precious than any vow. Tears welled in her eyes. "Is this truly my home now?" "If you'll have it," he replied. She smiled through her tears. For the first time, the word home felt real. Yet in her heart, she knew the world beyond still waited. Whispers, dangers, and storms yet to come. But here, in this cabin on Fire Ridge Mountain, she had found a beginning. And beginnings, she thought, were stronger than endings. Every story I share reminds me how deeply we all long for love, dignity, and freedom. Prue's journey is not just hers. It belongs to anyone who has ever felt unseen or unloved, yet still dared to hope. I'd love to know, where are you listening to this story from? Leave a comment below and share a piece of your world with us. And if you believe, as I do, that love can burn through any cage, stay close. The next story is waiting, written just for you.